on News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
O'Connor and Company.
7:36 now, Wednesday morning here in the nation's capital. 19th day of July. Wow, this year is just flying by. Coming up, what's in Larry Hogan's political future? Just when you thought he was done, he keeps dragging himself back in. We're going to get into that coming up in just a few moments. But first, Julie Gunlock and I are happy to welcome Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. And you and Julie get extra points for actually getting my name right.
We practice all morning long.
We do.
Hans. Hans, of course, is a former member of the Federal Election Commission and now a senior legal fellow over at Heritage Foundation. And I like to say you've forgotten more about election law than most people ever know. So I'd love for you to focus on a couple of things that are going on in the news right now. Let's first tackle what I believe to be election interference here at the hand of Jack Smith, the special counsel, bringing these charges apparently against Donald Trump in the height of the presidential election that we're in the middle of. This is related to January 6th. Hans, if there was a legitimate law that Donald Trump is accused to have broken on January 6th, why did it take them nearly 3 years to finally bring these charges? The timing here is awful.
Well, it is, and I have a hard time believing that there's any legitimacy to it. In essence, they're trying to criminalize contesting an election outcome. That is absurd. Election outcomes are contested all the time across this country, all over the place.
Mostly by Democrats, by the way, up until recently.
Yes. Yeah, no kidding. I wonder why haven't they gone after Al Franken, the former U.S. Senator from Minnesota?
Right.
Remember, he and his lawyer Mark Elias contested the Republican senator who had supposedly won re-election, but then they went to court and they contested it. I mean, this is just the kind of absurd thing that the Justice Department previously didn't do.
Hans, they're going to say that this goes well beyond contesting an election. This is the president having a rally on the Mall the day they were accepting the Electoral College on January 6th, that he stirred these people up, and he knew full well that he had lost the election, but he still inspired people to go and commit violent acts on Capitol. This is their argument. And because they claim, was injudicious with his language and didn't concede the race, that he is now responsible for the events of January 6th. Is there any, you're a lawyer, you've worked in the Justice Department, is there any federal standing for this?
I don't believe so. I recall when we looked at the speeches that he made, he was very clear that he did not want violence to occur. He did not encourage people to engage in criminal trespass, to break into the Capitol. And I think they have such a weak case that, again, I can't believe they are bringing it. And frankly, if we actually had mature, nonpartisan individuals in charge at the U.S. Justice Department, they wouldn't be bringing these charges. But that tells you just who's running things.
One quick follow-up, and there's been speculation, I speculated to myself earlier in the program, that much of this is to trigger the 14th Amendment. That states that if you were involved in an insurrection against the United States, that you're ineligible for federal office. Is that a correct interpretation of the 14th Amendment? And do you think that that's kind of at play here?
I wrote an entire research paper on this because that provision is no longer in effect. The left doesn't want to acknowledge that, but Congress actually passed two laws, as they're entitled to under the very wording of that amendment in the late 1800s, that got rid of that provision. It's the only amendment, the only part of the entire Constitution that gave Congress the ability to vote part of it out of existence, and they did that. That provision is no longer there.
I want to pivot over to talk about Trump's comments last night on Hannity. Hannity pressed him on early voting, and Trump kind of hedged. He said, yeah, sure.
Let me play a little bit of it.
Maybe
sure. We can have Hans.
Sure.
My question is, do you now encourage and embrace early and voting by mail, and legal ballot harvesting?
I do, but I also have to say something else, because the one thing a lot of people,
But this is important,
including
you
you,
do.
don't talk about, they also create phony ballots, and that's a real problem. That's my opinion. But they create a lot of phony ballots.
Has your mind shifted? In other words, I think if Republicans start out Election Day down 200, 300, 500,000 votes, that becomes nearly impossible to catch up with.
For some reason, Republicans always wanted to go out on Tuesday and they wanted to vote, and I respect that. I think it's great, and it would be great if we could get back to one day and all the things that you said with one thing else.
I agree with you.
With voter ID. With voter ID.
You know, that sort of sentiment of, oh, look, let's make it a special day. I mean, that's sort of the traditional Republican push here, but or feeling. Youngkin's quite different. Here in Virginia, he now has the Secure Your Vote program, really to encourage voters to sign up to vote absentee and to vote early. I'm curious, though, if Youngkin is going to do anything further on this ballot harvesting, which the Democrats are doing, and it's really resulting in wins for them. Is that on the agenda for the Youngkin staff or administration?
Look, I don't know if it is, but it should be. Look, I've written a lot, and you all know I think early voting shouldn't extend beyond 2 weeks. Absentee balloting should be limited only to people who actually can't make it to a polling place on Election Day. And I think ballot harvesting, I like to call it ballot trafficking, should be banned. But you have to play by the rules in place wherever you are. So if those are the rules that are governing your state, then you need to take advantage of those if you want to win elections. That does not mean that you don't continue to try to change the rules back to get more secure elections. And that's what the legislature needs to keep pushing to do. Youngkin needs to keep pushing to do. But in the meantime, the Democrats, before they left office, as you know, in Virginia, changed all the rules, including driving a huge hole through the state's voter ID law. They need to try to fix that, but in the meantime, they got to play by the rules the Democrats put in place.
Hans, can you stay there? There's a little bit more going on in election law that I think that you can lend your opinion on, especially with regard to ranked choice voting, which just got back into the news here locally. Can you stick with us for one more segment?
Sure, happy to do it.
Oh, thank you, sir. It's 7:48 now, and we continue with Hans von Spakovsky, an election law expert, formerly of the Justice Department, now at Heritage Foundation as a senior legal fellow. Hans, we've discussed ranked choice voting. Real fast before we get to the news here and how it pertains to voters in Arlington, can you just give us a quick summary of what ranked choice voting? Because part of the problem is people still don't know what the hell they're doing when they go to vote.
Well, that is exactly right, because it's confusing and chaotic. What it means is if there are 5 candidates, for example, for a city council seat, when you go in, you don't vote for the one candidate you want to have win. You're supposed to rank all 5 candidates from your first choice to your last and 5th choice. And then they go through this complicated tabulation process where if the person you picked, your top choice, came in last in the race, they throw out your first choice vote, and your second choice becomes your first choice.
Right. And they keep doing that
going
until somebody hits 50% plus one, right?
Right. And in the New York mayor's race, a year or 2 years ago, it took them 8 rounds of vote tabulation before they could figure out who the winner was. And because so many people won't rank all the candidates.
Right.
They don't know them all. They don't want to put a number down to people they'd never vote for. Because of that, like in New York, they threw out the ballots of 140,000 voters.
Right.
But by the time they got to the 8th round, who hadn't ranked all the candidates.
Or like in Alaska, where people voted for Sarah Palin and walked away because they thought, oh, that's what we do in elections.
Yes.
And then when she didn't get 50% plus one, they then went to the second round, and lo and behold, they threw out all those Sarah Palin votes because people didn't rank other people. So that brings us to what Arlington has done. They utilized this for the primary, and then they've just met and they decided, you know what, let's toss it out. It's kind of interesting that they were fine with it for the primary, but now they decided otherwise. It sounds like you think that was the right thing to do, but why should this be left up to such narrow individual jurisdictions? Shouldn't there be sort of state guidelines at the very least on this?
There should, and in fact, the state ought to ban it, which is what many states have done recently, because the push for this, once again, is coming from big left-wing foundations who are pushing this change, even though it's not a good change. I mean, look, the board vice chair, Libby Garvey of Arlington County, was quoted as saying that she didn't completely understand how it worked. Now, how does she expect the average voter to understand it? And I'm sorry, but look, this has been in places in areas like California in municipal races for a long time.
Yeah.
And they've had nothing but
confusing
problems with it. You may have heard they had a school board race last year in California where they declared the winner. And a couple of months later, only after an audit by an outside group, did they realize that they had declared the wrong winner.
God.
And the person who they said lost had actually won the election. And the reason was it's so confusing, and the voting and tabulation process is so complicated that even the election officials didn't realize they'd made a mistake.
Every single so-called reform that the left, and it's always coming from the left, what they want to institute to change the way our elections were done, 30, 40 years ago, when win or lose, you'd walk away at least feeling like it was done fairly. Every single reform they put in place has two end results. Number one, it helps Democrats.
Yeah.
And number two, it makes people suspicious about the system.
And really complicates it.
Throws it into chaos.
Yep.
Got to fix it. But you got to win elections to fix it. That's the rub. You got to win those elections that are so screwed up to actually get in there and fix it. And then the president will call you Jim Crow. Hans, always great to thank you. Very thorough, very, very smart. I don't know how you get on this program, but we appreciate it either way. Thank you, Hans.
Thanks for having